Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fuliana Osborne, although she's not here today because she's on grandma duty in Queensland. So we have our guest host, Jamie Wadley, with us today. And many of you who are listening will know Jamie through some of his other appearances on the podcast. Our special guest today that we're going to talk to is Steven Gaffney. Steven Gaffney is CEO of the Steven Gaffney Company, and he is the leading expert on creating consistently high-achieving teams, the author of Unconditional Power, and a keynote speaker on leadership teams. Steven has helped leaders and teams from Fortune 500 companies, US government and military organisations, and industry giants such as Amazon, Marriott, Lockheed Martin, and American Express. Guided by scientific and engineering ethos, Steven ventured into entrepreneurship, creating a company committed to resolving human relationships as well as team and organisational challenges. Today, this engineering-inspired approach stands as the pillar of Steven Gaffney Company and the Steven Gaffney Worldwide, driving their mission of fostering high-achieving organisations and teams. Now, Steven, before we start, I'm going to have to say this is going to be a battle between the architects, me, and the engineers, you, and the creative, Jamie.
Excellent. We can go wherever you want. And thank you for having me on your show.
Pleasure. Steven, we sent you some questions, as we do with all of our guests. As I mentioned just before we came on air, we will ask those, but we might well venture into other areas as well. The first one, I think, is a good one to start because as we talked a little bit beforehand about our listening audience, it was about our listeners range from CEOs to those just beginning their careers. Two-part question, how would you define high-achieving teams and are they always desirable?
Those are great questions to start off with. First of all, I do want to call the attention. We are saying high-achieving teams, not high-performing teams.
Okay.
Now, here's the problem with most of the stuff out there that is saying about high-performing teams. I think it misses the mark because the word performing can be confused with hard work, and achieving is about results. And let's face it, most teams are paid and people are paid to produce results, not by the effort. It is ultimately by the results. And why this is so important is for people who lead organizations or even small teams have probably experienced where you've asked somebody to do something and they'll say, I'm overwhelmed. What do you want me to do? I'm working really hard. And of course, the response is, I'm not questioning your work ethic. It's about the results we're producing, and we need to change things. And let's face it, in today's work world, and we can talk about it on a world level, all kinds of things are happening and changing, from the political scene to the AI to everything, and the ability to be flexible and adjust is really critical. So what we were doing yesterday, so to speak, is not necessarily the right thing to do today or where we need to go in the future. It is about achieving, not performing.
That's excellent because Jamie and I also had that discussion and I was told that it was just semantics. So
Oops. Well, and so we developed this terminology around consistently high-achieving teams because the other aspect is to do it consistently. Because even achievement could be one and done, or we're achieving, then we're not, and it's up and down. This is about how to be consistently high-achieving teams. And to your on the second part of the question, which you asked just a few minutes ago about is it desirable? Yes, I do. I think it's all what we're paid to do. I mean, even if you look at your marriage or someone's marriage or relationships, it's about the results we're achieving. So, have you ever met a couple where people are just doing a lot of communication, but we're not producing results? Or they're going to therapy and this, well, what results got produced? I think ultimately we have to ask ourselves, are we moving forward? Are we achieving or are we just performing?
So that then comes, before we go on to the other questions, that raises for me the question of communication. And this means we'll go down a whole different path in the conversation. You've got a team that's obviously made up of individuals that you have made it clear to them that you expect them to be high achieving. Is it different communication for different people then? Different forms of communication?
Well, there's certain foundational principles. So the foundational principle that deals with the number one problem with all relationships and all teams is lack of honest communication. But what I mean by honest communication isn't about the truth or lies. The biggest problem is not what people say, it's actually what they don't say. And that's where we feel like, oh my gosh, if they had just told me that, I could have done something about it. Whether it's losing a great employee, losing a client, losing not achieving a situation. Oh my gosh, if I had just known, we could have done something. How about somebody who's mad at you or mad at someone, but they don't tell that person, they tell other people. So it's really interesting where it still comes back to honest communication as a foundational principle. And then you're right, we do have to adjust it. As a friend of mine said to me years ago, great leaders visit other people in their neighborhood. Poor leaders expect other people to come to their neighborhood. Great leaders really do visit, and you have to adjust things accordingly. But the foundational principle is about honest communication.
We had a guest on reasonably recently, Oscar Trimboli, who talked about deep listening in those situations, and that it was more understanding that exercise of listening, actually listening to what was being communicated rather than thinking of the next thing that you had to say or the 125 words that you could get out, because that's all we were capable of doing. So it's interesting to have that reinforced in a different way, a good way for our listeners to look at that issue.
Well, and I want to speak to deep listening for a moment, because I love that terminology, because deep listening is beyond the words. Anybody can recite the words, and what I hear you saying is that's so basic. It's like, well, what's going on? Well, so somebody will say, well, I can't believe the way the person talked to me that way. And I'll say, okay, but why are they being that way? It sounds like they're mad. Well, they are mad, but if you asked why they're mad, do you know why they're upset, or whatever the case may be? Have you ever had a feeling or experience where you're trying to help somebody and they might even say, well, what would make me happy is if you did this, or if you did that. And so we jump through hoops trying to make them happy sometimes. And then seemingly we can't get it right. And sometimes people say, I can't make that person happy. Well, that may be true, but how about maybe we haven't really explored what would ultimately make them happy? And that really is about deep listening, really getting beyond the words. When somebody's negative, maybe they don't feel appreciated, or maybe that's their way of sharing how much they care and they want attention and they're trying to help the organization. I'm not saying being negative is the best form of communication, but I think so often in life we get caught up in the words people say rather than listening to the true message they're ultimately trying to convey.
I guess we're going to stray into the honest communication area as well. Have you seen it as a cultural barrier as well?
In what way? You mean different cultures might treat honesty differently?
Yes.
Well, here's what I think is people overdo the reliance on different parts of the world and different cultures. Yes, what makes us different can be where we grow up or where we're from, but human beings are a lot more complex than that. We are the way we are because of our genes, but also because of how we were parented, and there's a lot of things. And so one of the things I don't really like is when people label other people. It's an oversimplification. It's like saying people from Asia are a certain way, or people from Australia are or all U.S. And it's just not true. It's like it's an oversimplification, and I find people do that as a way, it's almost, they may not intend it, but it often ends up being a cop-out rather than really finding out what makes that individual tick. And what I realize is by working again with great leaders, they do visit other people in their neighborhood and really spend time to get to know other people. I understand if you're running a huge organization, it's not going to happen with everybody, but how about with your direct reports? Or how about with your main customer or customers? The point being is, I don't really like labeling because it's an oversimplification. I believe in just getting to know people because we're complex and we are the way we are for all sorts of reasons.
I'm reminded of a story that reinforces that a long, long time ago, generations ago. H.J. Hines used to have an annual picnic where he invited absolutely everyone and their families out for the day. And it was his way of having those conversations, of finding out not just what people who worked for him were thinking, but what the families thought of the organisation as well, as a direct connection through the person that worked there. And I just think that I always fall back on that as a great example of actually finding out what people think about your organisation.
Right. And let's face it, we have a total life, right? So, the problem with workplace balance is it almost deals with that we have like two different parts of our life, but it's all joined together. Work affects personal and personal affects work. In fact, a lot of the principles I've developed and we teach, hired for business, but people use it at home. And because there is no difference, I believe, between business and personal communication. It's just the way we might apply it. right? And maybe the word choice and whatnot. But the foundational principles is, whether we're at work or at home, is we don't want to get surprised and blindsided. We want to get that unsaid said. And that helps out all relationships.
There you have our introduction to Steven Gaffney. Next week we go quite in depth. Next week's episode is a much longer one than we've had in the past, but this gives you a little bit of a taste for what we're going to talk about next week, covering things about honest communication, making the unsaid said, and unconditional power. I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fuliana Osborne. We're joined by guest host Jamie Wadley, and we're talking to Steven Gaffney. This is Inside Exec.